Hi everyone, my name's Jono Lineen. I'm a writer, a museum curator, and a trekking guide. And I'm going to read to you today from my new book, Searching for Breath, Life, Death, and the Air in Between, out now from Pottersfield Press, right there. So the part I'm going to read is around about the start of the book, and I start by talking about the bushfires in Australia that I was living through and how that was a lot of the uneasiness around that was transmitted through the smoke that was in the air. Then I talk a little bit about the onset of COVID-19 in 2020 and how again there was this uncertainty about breathing and the air. And then I talk about the incredible events that surrounded the passing of my mother, Maureen. So then in May, my mother, who had been battling cancer for 15 years, sensed the end. Mum was an indomitable force. She had outplayed 4 different tumors and danced her way through her 70s. But now she had been double hit by a stroke and a recurrence of her ovarian cancer. I was in Australia and she was back on Vancouver Island. Because of the virus and related travel bans, it was impossible for me to return so we could spend those last days together. There was a deep sadness and a tinge of injustice when I realized I would not be able to sit with that wonderful woman and hold her hand as she moved out of this life. But dwelling on the negative was not something my mother had ever encouraged, and I settled for Zoom calls across the Pacific. By the middle of the month, the end was in sight, but for my brother, sister, and myself, there was an unreality about it all. There was denial and angst. How could such a dynamic individual just disappear? And then early on a Tuesday morning, I checked my email and found the note from my brother I had been dreading. Mum had only hours left. She was at home, at peace, and surrounded by the love of her children. I called her, and my sister held the phone to her ear. I walked out onto the nature trails behind our house. The sun was rising over the local hills, and the ridge's jagged summit line was outlined in amber. The air was still but full of the scent of resiny eucalyptus. I walked and talked with Mum for one last time. I don't know if she understood what I had said, but it was a great comfort to once again express my love for her and offer gratitude for everything she had given me. I returned to the house where my wife Trish was just getting up, and we sat in the bed holding hands. Peter, my brother, texted me a photo. There was Mum, lying in her bed, and Katrina, my sister, was resting beside her, their heads touching. Peter held her hand, and the sun flowed in through the bedroom windows. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Over the phone, I could hear Katrina talking gently to Mum, an impromptu stream of consciousness. A prose poem on how much she loved her, how beautiful she looked in her favorite green blouse, and how we all accepted that it was her time to move on. I gripped Trish's hand tighter, and 10,000 kilometers away, Peter placed the phone on Mum's chest. Katrina stopped speaking, and all I could hear was Mum's breath, in and out, a wind of existence entering and exiting her body. The sound was mesmerizing, so simple, so essential, so universal. I became completely immersed in it. There was nothing beyond the sound, the movement of breath, the gentle heaving of Mum's chest. I lost myself and connected back to my mother, not as an individual, but as the creator of me. Staring at the photo, imagining, no, believing that I was in the room beside her, my own hand on her chest, feeling the movement, the soft push and pull of air that is proof of life. Across the globe, my own breath meshed with Mum's. We were inhaling and exhaling together. Time stretched out. There was only the magical contraction and relaxation of muscles and wind. And then time stood still. Mum stuttered, let out a whispered exhalation, drew in a gulp, and that was it. No more. Mum had passed, and I was left hovering. The sun was well above the horizon, and the energy of emotion pulsed through me. There were tears and the hard task of breaking the news to my kids that their Nana was no more. We gathered tight and held each other close. I was hollow. I needed something real, and so went for a walk and climbed a hill close to our home. The steep, south-facing track had me panting. I stopped to catch my breath. I felt dizzy. Was it the walking? No, there was something deeper, a throbbing, subliminal sense of disconnection. Yes, Mum had died, and with her a cornerstone of my childhood family had collapsed. A huge piece of my personal jigsaw puzzle had evaporated. And in the background to this uncertainty, the virus hovered, chipping away at the last vestiges of my belief in human authority, of my understanding of where I fit in this world. The idea that we are above rather than part of nature had been twisted and torn and destroyed over the past months. The virus had originated in cave-dwelling bats half a world away, and I, an extremely privileged, well-educated white man in a developed country, was as susceptible as a destitute potato farmer on the slopes of the Andes or a Lagos slum dweller working the streets. To the south, on the rugged eastern slopes of the Brindabella Mountains, I could see the black scars of February's bushfires and was reminded that the all-giving environment, the nature that had provided for humanity for millions of years, was changing dramatically. And that alteration was driven by human greed and ignorance. I stopped, dropped a knee to the earth, and steadied myself against a rock outcrop. Breathe. I sat, took in a deep breath, and let the warm air whistle slowly over my teeth. Another inhalation. Again and again, I let it move through me. I was taken back to my mother's final breaths, and I understood that same hum, the calming swish of air moving over her lips, down her trachea, and farther into the labyrinth of her lungs, was the very first sound I had consciously perceived. It was the echoing vibration I had listened to as a developing child inside her womb. Her breath was my breath. Her oxygen was in me. And then my deep absorption, the meditation I had dropped into while engaged with her final breaths, made sense. The connection, the immersion, the unity across time and space, the comfort that the sound of her inhalations and exhalations had instilled in me. I stood, stretched my shoulders back, released my chest, breathed deeply again, and felt the deep repose that measured breathing can instill. That was it. The link between bushfires, climate change, world-ravaging viruses, and the death of my mother. It was breath. It was breath that brought in the toxic bushfire smoke and the invisible virus. It was breath that had brought me into this world, and it was the end of that breath that sees us all out. It is the energy of life and the evidence of death. It is the most beautiful sound in the world and the most feared silence. It conveys the smells that attract and repulse us and releases the words and music that move us to higher planes. As the philosopher Emmanuel Cochia said, everything in the realm of the living is the articulation of breath. From perception to digestion, from thought to pleasure, from speech to locomotion, everything is a repetition, intensification, and variation of what takes place in the breath. I continued walking, pushing on to the summit of my local hill, still breathing heavily, but now clearer, even quietly confident that this thing, this humanly intrinsic process I had taken for granted, was something I wanted to investigate. Thank you very much.